practice session on the top. Are we in a practice session?
No.
Yeah, that allows you to do this without starting the recording right away. It's a good thing.
I see. Okay.
We'll get there.
And it's before it's open to the public.
Session on the top. Are we in a practice?
Okay. All right. I'm gonna,
Let's see what we have in attendance. 1, 2,
making you, Andrew, a co-host.
3, 4.
Howard, I'm now making you a co-host. The meeting.
So far, this looks like 5 committee members as of 6 now.
So I'm handing the meeting to you guys at this point, and everything's a go.
Okay, let's see. We need a volunteer to take minutes.
This is the toughest part of the meeting.
It is indeed. And don't everyone all try to
Well, we have a
outdo
new
each other.
committee person who doesn't seem to be here. I thought maybe we could voice the responsibility on her. Irina Stennett has joined our committee.
She'll be here. She said she was coming. Do we want to ask our newest member to welcome her that way?
I wish you luck on that one.
Yeah, I
You've
don't know.
got, by the way, you've got Colleen and Doug as, and Paul as attendees you might want to promote.
Let's see, attendees. Doug, panelist, yep. Oh, I see Muzzy is on already. That's great. Let me promote Muzzy. And let's see.
Julian, I sent you something in the chat.
Hey, sorry to interrupt again, but for some reason, the emails about this meeting are coming to me and not to somebody else. So I thought I'd share that I just got an email from Captain Zuber of the 20th Precinct who writes, "I'm at a mobilization. If I can make it back in time, I will log on to the Transportation Committee meeting." So you know what I know.
Right, okay. I'm waiting for one other speaker for our first item, but let's welcome our newest member, Irina Stennett, to the committee. Good to see you here, Irina. I know you've been interested in transportation for years and years, so it's great to have another face and viewpoint.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you. Let me just see. I'm stalling because I told our 2 speakers on this important topic of homeless in the subways.
Demand for gasoline rose nearly 20% nationwide.
Paul, you've got to mute.
Compared to
At least it's relevant.
Wow. The issue of homeless folks living in the subways has been brought. Paul, please mute your, oh, you did. Okay, excellent. The issue of the homeless living in the subways has been an issue that has caught a lot of people's attention. I've heard individually from folks, and so we have Muzzy Rosenblatt, who is on at the moment, who is the CEO of Bowery Residence Committee, which is the company the city has hired and the MTA partially pays for to help the homeless in the subways. We are awaiting Leilani Irvin from the Department of Social Services who will be joining us momentarily. And I don't know which one is going to speak first, but I will phrase the issue that is on everybody's mind as soon as Leilani joins us. So let me see what we have right now. We are also changing the order of the items on the agenda. So the e-bike item will be second, and Steve Brown, our chair, has gotten several great folks who we expect will be talking on this, and we've shared some information that that we got earlier from Jay, who did some research on the legality of e-bikes and e-scooters. So let's just see if we've got our other person. Attendees. Don't have Leilani yet. Should we begin? We can begin with Muzzy, if that works for folks. So the issue of the homeless living in the subways is obviously not a good one. It's not good for them. It's not good for transit workers. It's not good for riders. Many of these folks need services, they need housing, they need healthcare, they may need mental assistance, mental health care, they certainly need food. This is not good living in the subways. Breathing rail dust 24/7, or at the moment 22/7, is not good either. I know that I've seen BRC's employees in the subways dealing with homeless individuals. I know that during the 1 to 5 a.m. shutdown, which happened earlier last May and continued till not that long ago, I know that something like 12% of homeless individuals, when the system was closed down and they had to exit, accepted services. Don't know how many of them have returned to the system, if that acceptance of service was for a very limited time, or that they've received permanent housing and or other services. So Muzzy, would you like to start? Muzzy Rosenblatt from Bowery Residents Committee.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, members of Community Board 7. It's good to be with you and to talk about this issue. It is incredibly important. And I want to thank you as a former member of a community board myself, CB3, for about 8 or 9 years at the earlier part of this century. So I know the sacrifice you make at a beautiful night like tonight, and all the time to do the work of the community. And I think it's great. And I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about these challenges and issues that have existed, of course, for a long time. And I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if it's me or if somebody else has unmuted. And I'm sorry, I'm using my phone. My laptop isn't working. I've got technical issues. So let me lay a little bit of a foundation and then talk about specifically what's happening. Well, though, Andrew, you did a great introduction. So BRC has been around for 50 years, started in the flop houses of the Bowery. And of course, homelessness has existed for a very long time. And homelessness in the transit system has existed for a very long time. And that's why we're here. And we want people to have good places to go, and we do, but we need more. But the challenge of what drives people into homelessness, sadly, it continues. As you noted, it is about mental illness. It is about substance use. It is about poverty. It is about an educational system that doesn't work for everyone, an economy that doesn't work for everyone. And those aren't excuses. Those are just facts. And we are there to mitigate that. We are there to give people second chances. We were actually founded by individuals who were living in the flop houses, Bowery Residents Committee, a committee of residents of the Bowery, who, though they lived in these 4x6 cubicles, you know, back when the Bowery was the Bowery, as some of us may remember, they didn't have a lot, but they had hope. And they just needed a chance. They needed somebody in their corner to give them, as we like to say, a hand up, not a handout. We believe that people, if given the tools and the motivation and the support and the healthcare that they need, over time do change. We're a very data-driven organization, and that's what we see. And where it isn't working, then we try new technologies and new strategies. We'll talk a little bit about something called a safe haven. That was an innovation that started at BRC on the Bowery in 2006 when we were challenged by Mayor Bloomberg. Why aren't people in a city that has a right to shelter? Why are people voting with their feet and not using shelter? Right? You look at Los Angeles, San Francisco, I've been there. They don't have a right to shelter. They have the same overall numbers of homelessness as we do, tens of thousands, 60,000, 70,000. In LA, 90% live on the street and 10% live in shelter. In New York, 90% live in shelter and 10% live on the street, or in the subways, which the city calls the street, includes the subways. So I've kind of gotten stuck with that. And I am a recovering bureaucrat. I'll say that too. I worked for 3 mayors Koch, Dinkins, and Giuliani. I helped create the Department of Homeless Services. I led it for a period of time. And then I came over to the nonprofit sector to do this work. And BRC is as you noted, not only the MTA and DHS's provider, the largest provider of homeless outreach services 24/7, 365 across the city. We're responsible for being present and working with individuals throughout the subway system and anywhere else on MTA property in New York City and beyond. Any Long Island Railroad station, any Metro North station. Now Andrew's going to call me to a whole bunch of other meetings now that he learned that. And but that is our job. But our job is not that we help achieve this. Our primary mission is to help people get to a better place. Our primary mission is not to make people disappear. And so for us to help people, they do move to a better place. So that's what we're trying to do. Is outreach only works when it's connected to places to people to go. If we have boots, the outreach workers, but we don't have beds, places for people to go, then we won't be able to take somebody who wants to go. And so it's always been a combination of boots, beds, and then the literally ability to move people from where they are on the street, in the subway, in Penn Station or Grand Central, to the beds and the right kind of beds. And again, that's why we came up with the safe haven idea in 2006, where people were saying, I don't want the large shelters for a variety of reasons. Don't buy into anyone who tells you everything is absolutely one way. Are there bad shelters? Yes. Are there good shelters? Yes, they're amazing shelters, and we run some of them, just like there are good doctors and bad, and good restaurants and bad. You don't say, oh, I want to go out to dinner, and say, I'll just go to the nearest place. You find a place, and you go to the place that's right for you. And I may feel like Italian, and you may feel like Chinese. And if we go to the opposite places, we're not going to be happy. So the work of an outreach worker is to take the time to listen to that individual and figure out, what do they want for dinner tonight? Not what are we feeding? Right? And what is going to get them to go where they want to go? And it isn't always that they want a bed, the first step. They have been to hell and haven't found their way back yet. And what they may want first is to see a doctor, or what they may want first is to take a shower, or what they may want first is to just get a meal. What we're trying to do is build a relationship that says, we can deliver anything you want, but you've got to want it. So we're going to help you want it. And we're going to start with, what do you want? Not what do I want? What do you want? Because if I can give you what you want, then you're going to want more. Then you're going to see me, the outreach worker, dressed like this, as a resource that can actually help you, as opposed to somebody who's trying to make you do something you don't want to do. And so that is the fundamental essence of how outreach works. It's building a relationship. It's being patient. It's listening. It's not giving in and condoning it. I listened to Sarah Feinberg's interview with John Catsimatidis over the weekend, which the New York Post took out of context. But what she said, I have no argument with. No one should be sleeping in the subways. We should not, as a society, accept that. And there are some who do, but we don't. What we're constantly trying to say to every person we meet, no matter how sick they are, no matter how lost they seem, no matter how much pain they seem to be in, both physically and mentally, that we will stand by you and help you get to a better place. And we believe you can do it. And that often is critical to doing it, along with the tangible resources. So that's kind of the big picture. I won't belabor it anymore. We're good at what we do. How do I know? So, I took some time since I knew I was coming to just look at the data for the subway. So the way we work in the subways, like I said, we go 24/7, 365. Our focus since COVID, as Andrew said, has been focusing on the end of line, on the overnight shift. which is what we have always done, even before the shutdown, and what we will always do. Why? Because the subway is less populated at night, because the trains don't run as quickly. When a train comes to a terminus station, be it 207th Street and Broadway on the A train, or World Trade Center on the E train, or Coney Island, Mermaid Stillwell on the F and the R and the many others, that train will stay there for a while.
Not the R, Muzzy. Not the R.
The N then.
B,
The N,
D,
the
F,
F,
and
the
N,
D.
yes.
Okay. So I knew it was one of the yellow lines. So, when a train pulls into 79th and Broadway, doors open, 30 seconds, we're trying to get on. The conductor may not even wait for us. Doors closing. We're not going to have opportunity there to engage somebody. And the whole world is watching. If it's at rush hour, the whole world is watching. And when the whole world is watching, not a lot of people want to kind of air their whole life story. But when a train pulls in at 1 a.m. at Coney Island Stillwell, and it lays up there, we have time to have these conversations and to say to somebody, without the whole world listening, we're here to help you. So, and that's been highly successful. So, the fact that the subway's going back to 24-hour operations won't change the fact that we will continue to be out there. But we're also out at 79th and Broadway and 72nd on the 123 and Columbus Circle. And the way we determine how we visit all the stations is based, again, on data. And so we use 311 data. We use the station, the GSMs, the general station managers, report and tell us what they see, what the cleaning teams tell us, what the transit districts tell us, what the community boards tell us, and what we see from our own observation. And based on that, our conversations regularly with MTA, DHS, NYPD, MTA PD, and BRC. And by the way, I just spoke to Al Styler in San Diego. He sends his regards, but he's happy over there, who was one of the chiefs at the MTA police and wants me to come out there. We rank the stations criticality from a high level, tier 1, to a low level, tier 4, which tier 1 or tier 2, those stations are going to be visited 3 or 4 times a week. A tier 3, once a week. A tier 4, less often than that. Again, unless we get new information, and those tiering adjustments are usually revisited every quarter, unless more compelling information comes in. And then we go out and we do what we describe. So when we're in the non-terminus stations during the day, we're mostly working with people who are entrenched on the platform. They may be sitting on a bench, trains come, trains go, they're just sitting there with their bags. They may be obviously homeless. They may not be so visibly homeless until the train comes, 3 trains come, and they still haven't gotten on. And again, we'll engage with them. So in the last quarter for which I have data, January to March 2021, all the NYCT subway stations in Community Board 7, we did a total of, in those 90 days, we did a total of 241 visits to those stations combined. 5 times we did joint operations with the NYPD. So even though you may have heard that the NYPD aren't working with homeless people, they are, but I didn't tell you that. But I see we're recording, so I guess I did. In those 241 visits, which could be, again, multiple visits to the same station, of course, we observed 197 individuals. We made contact with 129, meaning we tried to engage all 197. Not all would engage with us. A contact is a meaningful interaction where we can get some information about the person, maybe a name, maybe a sense of who they are, what they want. And we made 5 placements. Comparing that to the year prior, January to March 2020, so mostly non-COVID, a little pre-COVID, 251 visits, 6 joint operations, 185 observations, 138 contacts, and 4 placements. And that's kind of been the pattern. But what I think—
Muzzy, can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
When you make a placement, do you get—
Where do they go?
No, do you get notified if they leave that placement?
It depends. It's a great question. So what is a placement? A placement could be to a shelter. Obviously, people have a right to shelter. But placements usually for the more high profile individuals we see in the subways is either to a safe haven, which is a smaller residential, smaller dorms, smaller number of people. And in a safe haven, everyone is coming from the streets and subways. And the individuals we see on the streets and subways are very different in most cases than the individuals we see in a regular shelter. And so while a subway person or a street person would have the right to a shelter, because everyone does, somebody who hasn't been living unsheltered does not have a right to a safe haven and does not have a right to a stabilization bed. These are very specific programs that not only physically are somewhat different, but more significantly are really calibrated to the individuals we see who tend to be fairly autonomous. So there's a lot less structure. For example, shelters have a curfew. Safe havens and stabilization beds do not. Most people think, oh, why isn't a curfew a good thing? It depends. It isn't a good thing if you're a nocturnal person and you sleep during the day and you're out at night, because then if you come back at midnight or 1 a.m. and the door is locked, you're actually going to go back to the subway, as opposed to you can come in any hour. So they are a kind of a low threshold model that really makes it next to impossible to fail. And the safe haven is one version of that, and the city's opened a lot more of those. And then particularly, as I was saying before, we need the beds. During the pandemic, the city opened up specifically for the unsheltered street and subway population, and specifically because of COVID, with the need for de-densification, over 1,000 new stabilization beds. BRC alone has brought online over 600 beds during the pandemic, including over 300 at the Vanderbilt YMCA on East 47th Street. And so to your question, Andrew, when we place people, we'll find out, first of all, we run a lot of them. And so there's that integration of care. It's kind of like the baton relay in track, not that I ran track. It's not like stop and hand off and drop the baton and another person maybe didn't get it or wasn't there to get it. For a while, we're running side by side until we feel there's going to be that smooth handoff. And so the outreach workers are going to keep going back and visit. For example, some of the most high profile individuals in the system, 2 women who we recently placed just a few weeks ago from 72nd Street and Broadway are the sisters, or many people may have seen them. 2 older women, always together, very neatly bundled kind of parcels of newspaper on little kind of baggage strollers, and always dressed in black coats, black pants, black shoes, whatever. We have known them in the subway system for over a decade. And they have been recently on the Upper West Side for the past year or so. We placed them for the first time a month ago in a hotel, in a stabilization site downtown, and they are still there. And they are doing well. And in fact, one of the milestones that we've seen is, and again, this just shows you the challenge of the adjustment and why we need to be so patient with people, is they've actually begun to sleep in the bed. So they've been sleeping on the floor for a long time. Because again, when you think about what is it like sleeping in the subways on the bench, they're not very soft. And so the idea of sleeping in a bed is a very difficult sleep. And having showers and being able to have meals brought to you. So that is just an example of both what it takes to get it done, our undying commitment, where people go, and that kind of integration of care. And
Let me ask you this, Fuzzy, if I could. 472 stations, hundreds of trains in service at any given time. How many folks do you have out in the system at a given time?
So our peak period is the overnight, as I said, because it's both the time when we're going to be most effective. It's the time that most people are sleeping in the system because it's easier, even though obviously it's against the rules. The rules have to be enforced. We don't enforce it. And there aren't police everywhere, just like there aren't outreach workers everywhere. So that's why we're at, because you can actually lie down on a bench and not really feel like you're disturbing anybody. And it's pretty, quiet and undisturbed. So that's why we're there the most, because that's when we see people the most, which again, doesn't mean we don't see people other times. So on the overnight shift, like I said, is the busiest at our peak nights or mornings, which is just before midnight until just after sunrise. We'll have about 16 teams out with 2 to 3 people on a team. So we'll be at 16 end-of-line stations for the duration. We'll have 30-some staff. So we have about 200 staff total for the wheel, 24/7, 365. During the day shift, which begins just before rush hour at 7 a.m. And runs till mid-afternoon. And then the evening shift, which starts just before evening rush hour and runs until just before midnight, and then the overnight. So the day and evening shifts, we'll see less. We'll see maybe have anywhere from 8 to 10 teams out covering stations. And again, on on a schedule that says, all right, we're gonna hit the one train. One team will be working the one train today from South Ferry, to 242, or another team may be, doing the two teams. One may be doing the A in Manhattan, and another may be doing the A in Brooklyn. And we're based both out of 25th Street for the subways, and then we have another satellite base in the Bronx. So we're trying to minimize the amount of time we're traveling to get to the stations. And of course, we don't ride the trains, or maybe not, of course, for a variety of reasons. One, engaging with people on a train can be a very, we never know who we're talking to necessarily. And so we don't want to create a place where somebody feels threatened and literally their back is against the wall and they can't escape and we can't escape. And we've seen those interactions that happen on the subways. It doesn't have to be with somebody who's experiencing homelessness, right? It's just like you want to get out of there and there's no place to go. So we don't want to create a threatening environment when that's clearly not our intent. So we'll visit stations, like I said, and visit the platforms during the day and the evening and run the line. And so the van is taking us station to station. And then, of course, the van is critical because if we ride the train station to station, we left the van down at South Ferry, and then we get to 28th and 7th, and somebody says, hey, I want to go. It's like, oh, we don't have the van. So we bring the van with us. We hit station to station. We're not waiting for the trains. And that's kind of the method of how we do it. So like I said,
I'm not trying to rush you, Muzzy, but
sorry, I give long answers. I apologize.
No, but Leilani is on with us.
Oh, great.
And she may want to add something. We do have a packed agenda tonight, and I want to leave some time for questions if we could. I don't want to hog this. So Leilani, did you want to add some things from the DSS point of view?
Hi, no, I think Muzzy did an excellent job as always. Hi, Muzzy. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Leilani.
It's great to see you all. It's been quite a while. No, Muzzy really covered it all. And BRC, they do amazing work. So every time he speaks, I'm always learning as well. So yeah, no, I think he did a great job.
Okay, super. I see some hands. Let me just ask one last thing before we take some hands. Will the resumption of 24-hour service hamper you some in that people won't have to automatically be ejected at the end of a line? They can stay on, or will you just meet the trains at the end of the line and do what you normally do anyway?
We will beat the trains at the end of the line and do what we normally do anyway. That is an absolute. Our staffing will continue. It wasn't, flexing for the crisis. It wasn't a bunch of people on overtime who'll go back to straight time. We were given additional resources by the city to meet the need, and of course the need is still there. But in terms of how the system operates, so as I mentioned, what our role is not to be an enforcer, and it undermines our work if we're seen as an enforcer. And so we've always had a good partnership both with NYPD, transit districts and transit division, and MTA-PD. And when the stations were closing, there was a presence, and is a presence, obviously it's not over yet, where it was clear that the stations were closing and that people had to leave. And there was there were people there. And I have to say, I've been out dozens of mornings for this because it's really awesome to see just how well it worked, because it has gone so much better than I ever could have imagined it would, that people have actually accepted, as you noted, hundreds and hundreds of people not only have accepted services, but have stayed. We have over 800 people who we have placed since the inception of the pandemic who are still in their beds that they were placed in.
Here to talk, here to listen, here to support.
Thank you. But it also helped, and I never saw, maybe but once, because again, I'll never say never, I almost never saw a need for police physical intervention. Their presence there, basically letting everyone know, look, we're here to shut the station down. Everybody understood that, and that worked really well. And so the question I guess I have is, there are still rules, and I've had these conversations with our counterparts at MTA. The rules are that when a train comes into a station, last stop on the overnight, everyone's supposed to leave the train. It's not our job to enforce that rule. If that rule isn't enforced and people stay on the train, we'll engage with them, but they may stay on the train and ride back. Whereas if they're encouraged to follow the rule, come off the train, stay with us on the platform because the platform isn't closed. We can engage with them and we'll probably have greater success. It's always a real disappointment where we're beginning to have a conversation with somebody on a train, and then we hear the bing, bing, and the train's going to go back. And obviously the conductors and the motormen have to stay on their schedule, and we've lost that encounter, as opposed to we've got somebody on the platform sitting on a bench, and it doesn't matter what's happening with the train. We can just keep the conversation going. So that's going to be a critical piece, is not whether we're still there, but whether the other complementary pieces are there with us.
And I'm assuming that when the weather gets warmer, some folks will opt for the street as opposed to the subway. The subway was somewhat of a shelter in the harsh winter times, but
yes, and always has been. And that's why Penn Station has seen an uptick, because when the subways, including, Penn Station on the 123 ACE were closing, Penn Station didn't close.
That's right.
Condensed, but it didn't close. And so in the harshness of winter, a lot of folks who were not yet ready to make the change or wanted something that wasn't readily available that particular night. We've all tried to get the reservation in the restaurant we like, but it's available, just not on the night we want it. So we keep coming back. So that'll be the key to our continued success and more capacity.
We've got some questions from members of the committee. If you can take Susan, you're first, I believe.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I've been on the subway a few times in the past couple months where I've gotten off at 110th Street and stopped heading northbound on the express train, the 2-3, and I've stopped to let the person in the ticket booth know that there was a homeless person, on one occasion completely naked, stretched out in the car that I was on. I've given them the car number, and I'm just sort of curious, what's the protocol supposed to be? You might not be able to answer this, Muzzy, because it might be an NYPD question or an MTA question, but what is supposed to happen in that situation?
Well, somebody on a moving train is very hard to track, even if you give the car number, because I'm pretty sure this is still the case, though Andrew would know better than I. There's no way to track the car number GPS wise. So we can't know where that car is. If I've got a van, say within, a 15-minute drive of the one train, and I want to kind of catch up with it, no one's going to be able to tell me where that is. So it's very hard to catch somebody, so to speak, catch up with somebody on a moving train.
Actually, Fuzzy, I've reported people who've been like stretched out or what have you, or done something worse, and given the car number, and the rail control center does know every car number on a given train, and they can track.
That would be great. So obviously somebody who is in that state of psychological and mental health crisis, in our mind, in my mind, in BRC's mind, though we would want to intervene, that person probably needs hospitalization. We have certain workers on our team, so we would dispatch somebody who has a license under the New York State mental hygiene law to assess somebody as being a danger to themselves or others. And if we make that assessment, we have the capacity to order that person, if they won't go voluntarily, to be involuntarily taken to an emergency room, not hospitalized, taken to an emergency room by EMS and NYPD. And we do that with some regularity, not with frequency, but as is needed. And when they get to the emergency room, the doctor will evaluate them as a danger to self or others. Often, being naked is not seen as an imminent danger. And it is clearly evidence of a psychotic episode, but it is not something that would necessarily result in hospitalization. It's the doctor's decision. That said, if we've got that person in that situation, it gives us the opportunity to keep working with them. So, there's competing things. One is the moving train part of it, but even if it's somebody in the station, right, where it's going to be easier for us to get to them while they're there. And Andrew, I'm going to follow up on that to see if we can get better communication between MTA command center and our dispatch, because we have a central dispatch as well, where all our 311 calls come to, that we can then send a team to that train, or at least know when that train is scheduled, because every train's on a schedule, to hit its terminus, and then we'll wait to catch up with it. Now, of course, the individual may have hopped off the train before the train reaches the terminus, but that's the effort that we will go to to try and get somebody in crisis. And we've had a lot of success with very severely mentally ill people, but we have very strong laws that protect people's individual rights, and very hard to get somebody involuntarily hospitalized, even though I think to the average person, you would say that person is really not well.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, this was particularly wrenching. I know I need to move on, but I mean, I discreetly took a picture, showed it to the ticket booth person, and just really wanted to get the person help, because it was clear they were passed out and not in a great state. But I was more curious about the NYPD thing. I'll follow up with Andrew separately. But thanks so much for the answer. It's great.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Christian, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did, but
You lowered it?
yes, I did. Well, I just wanted to just let you know, 8th Avenue, 14th Street Station. I go to work every other day in the mornings, just shortly after 6 o'clock. There's always a homeless person sleeping at the bottom of the ramp. I just don't know
8th and
if your
14th?
team, yes, I don't know if your team has had a chance to.
Yeah, I
get
didn't bring
there.
Information on that location because it's outside of CB7, but I'll make sure that we look for that. Where at 8th and 14th? It's a pretty large station.
On when you the run leading down to the L train at the bottom of the ramp.
Okay, got it. That has long been a popular. There are some stations that have a lot of history. A lot, Broadway Lafayette is a popular, particularly stations that have mezzanines, Herald Square. The law is, as long as the person is not creating a threat to safety, to safe passage, they're not blocking the stairs, they're not blocking the ramp, they're not a trip hazard to people who are traveling through. It's very hard to enforce any kind of, even within the fare zone, because obviously the rules on the street, which is public space, is very different than within the fare zone. And of course, there's inside the fare zone, and it could be inside the station, outside the fare zone. And our clients are generally pretty cognizant of that and know generally where they can be, where they're not creating a so-called violation that would lead to a summons, because they will get summons for that.
Well, there was a change in MTA's code of conduct, as I'm sure you know, which gives you a certain amount of time you can be in a station. You must start traveling, and you must, exit in a certain amount of time. So technically, I would guess the majority of the homeless folks are in violation of the new MTA code of conduct, because they're not leaving.
And usually what happens is a police officer will come by. We're not the enforcer. I mean, we might mention, hey, can we help you? No, I'm fine. It's like, hey, you've been here a while. If you wait for a cop, you might get summons. But usually when a police officer comes, their first intervention is not to write a ticket. It's to ask the person to move. And usually, 9 times out of 10, they will.
Sure. Yep. Okay, we got a couple more, and then we're going to have to move. Ken, and then William.
Yeah, my nephew did homeless outreach for a number of years, and so I heard a lot of his stories, and I have great respect for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question is, when the subways have been shut down and haven't operated 24 hours, obviously that's put more homeless on the actual streets. And am I right in assuming that would contribute to the sense of social dysfunction in neighborhoods like ours?
I think there's some validity to that for sure, that people who live unsheltered at different times of the year with seasonality will choose different places to be. Some more likely to be underground in the winter, and more likely to be above ground in parks, in Broadway medians, et cetera, in the summertime or in warmer weather, for sure. And that's why the city, in addition to us underground, contracts with complementary agencies and we often coordinate our efforts. So for example, if we're doing a focus on Columbus Circle, which is probably the busiest station in CB7, breaking ground, CUCS, what's called the Manhattan Outreach Consortium, that's their jurisdiction. We're going to coordinate. DHS is going to be present, Transit District as well, so that we're all kind of know what each other's doing, because it makes no sense for us to be working underground. People go up, choose the path of least resistance. We want there to be outreach, on both ends of that interaction. And they're out there 24/7, 365 as well. Now, we can't be all places all the time, and neither can the street teams. But again, there is an effort to focus strategically on, on stations and areas above ground and underground where we're seeing greater numbers of people. And again, that's both from our own observation and what's reported. And so, whatever you think about 311, more is accomplished by phoning it in than by not phoning it in.
Thank you. William, I think you're the last raised hand.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Muzzy, for all the work that you guys do. I really do appreciate it. I just had one question as far as strategies for helping homeless in the subway system. I know you say you work late at night, which I think makes a lot of sense. Doing it in the middle of the day, I think, they will feel embarrassed of having someone talk to them and getting help and getting service. Is part of your strategy to is going late into the night, into the morning, to try to get as many homeless people help and support, getting them off the station on the trains before the morning rush? Because I know when we take the trains in the morning, sometimes a cart would be completely empty just because someone's sitting there or sleeping there. So is that part of the strategy too? Are you guys working in the morning, like 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and 7 a.m. before everything starts moving? I just think that'd be a good way to kind of get
sure. Absolutely. So the concentration of the effort, again, to try and get the greatest return on the investment, the greatest bang for the buck, is to hit the end of lines, right, where every train is going to come in for a while. But we do have teams that are doing station visits as well, even on the overnight. So our tours are our overnight tour begins at 11 p.m. and continues to 7:30 a.m. And then the day tour begins at 7 a.m. and continues to 3:30 p.m. So there's a bit of an overlap to allow for a shift change. And then we have some staggered shifts, some kind of, to kind of cross those divides so that we always have some presence out there. So, but I think implicit in your question is a strategy that, yes, is very important, which is to try and engage people when they're in this moment of transition. So as they're kind of getting ready to settle in for the night, we want to catch them before they get too comfortable. And when they're getting ready to get up in the morning, we want to catch them before they start doing something else and try and get them to come with us. So those are the early morning and the late night are critical times for us, which is why that is our period of greatest deployment.
Steve?
There's a question in the chat that I just, if you don't mind me interjecting. Oh, I'm sorry, your hand was raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to read the Q&A one. I don't know if that's the one you were going to read.
Yes, that's exactly.
In the chat as well. And then I was going to ask my question. So first, there's a question in the Q&A which just says, where does the budget come from for your services?
Mm-hmm. So we are funded, the subways are now funded by the city. In 2014, the MTA and the city of New York entered into a memorandum of agreement that said the city would take responsibility for the outreach in the subway system, and the MTA would contribute towards that. The city funds the predominant amount of it. The MTA contribution is not insignificant, but it is not 50-50. And as it's continued to grow, the cities continue to contribute more. So we are funded by a contract with the New York City Department of Homeless Services to be in the subways. We also have a separate contract directly with the MTA for the work we do in and on the Long Island Railroad property and in and on the Metro North Railroad property.
And again, thank you. I think very thorough. So that was for someone in the Q&A. I've got a couple questions. I'm going to ask two of them, and then perhaps I'll follow up from a timing perspective, and I'll work with Andrew. Can I just clarify one thing? I think that you said that you're primarily focused on the end of the day, end of the shift or night or timing wise, majority coming in from 11 on. And I think you said that you have some in the stations. I'm assuming that means at the station itself. Is that just confirming that generally there is no outreach, there is not outreach from you guys in terms of going into a train largely throughout the day? There's not a
No, sorry. So there are 3 shifts, and very rough, don't call DiNapoli on me on this, because he's already been on me for a bunch of stuff, and I'm happy to speak to that because he completely
There's a lot of stuff we
mischaracterized
can't
facts.
do on that. I took down your notes, so
Okay, so basically, of the roughly 200 and change outreach workers that we have, about 25% are the day tour, 25% are the evening tour, and 50% are the overnight tour, and then split among 7 days a week. And they go out in teams of 2 or 3.
Okay, and then the second part is I think that you and let me qualify as everyone else would qualify. We're all very empathetic. We appreciate your services.
Yeah.
And everyone wants only the
And we're all
best
frustrated.
for-
I'm
for-
frustrated.
for
I can't tell you
empathetic
how
human beings.
frustrated. Yeah.
Yes.
So let me just say that. But the next thing is, I think you mentioned that you would never ask someone to leave it. And I guess the question is, do you ever coordinate with the transit police in the sense of it's 7 o'clock at night, there's somebody who is laying down on a train, perhaps that person would ask that person to leave, that person may leave, and then you may engage them after. Is that ever a scenario, or do you have any strategies to do that together?
Absolutely. So we meet regularly in roundtables, obviously now virtually, but we used to meet either at 2 Broadway or at Livingston, with, which is where NYPD Transit is based. Chief O'Reilly's HQ used to be Chief Delatorre. I mean, first of all, Chief Delatorre would call me at every hour of the day or night about anything and everything. We had a really good collaboration.
He was definitely on the.
Yeah, he's on my speed dial. I'm on his speed dial. And I'm sure that'll happen with Chief O'Reilly and Owen Monahan and like I said, Al Styler and Greg and all of them. So, but we got so familiar with each other, not because we were calling to complain about each other, but because we had a system and a structure. These entrenched, chronic, long, age-old challenges, right? I think I mentioned to Andrew, but I didn't mention here. There's an article in Harper's Magazine that came out in March called "The Subways Are for Sleeping." You probably missed it because the March it came out in was 1956. So we need systems in order to do this. And that's why we have success. And that's why we continue to do it, because the need continues. So we have these roundtables with MTAPD, NYPD, DHS, BRC, the street outreach teams, where we are meeting regularly. I mean, we used to go to these meetings somewhere in the bowels of Grand Central at MTAPD, where we would review the top 10 cases of people at Grand Central. We would do the same thing at Penn Station, and Amtrak PD would join us. Top 10, top 50. Where are they? What's happening? To Andrew's earlier point, they got hospitalized. Sometimes we'd hear about things we didn't do, right? PD would say, oh yeah, we did an EDT, an EDP, an emotionally disturbed person transport. It was like, great. We will then, the outreach teams will go to the hospital and spend time in the hospital with the client and advocate against them being discharged back to the street until we've been able to find a suitable housing arrangement for them. And I've gone to war with Mitch Katz. I mean, we're good friends, the head of health and hospitals, if they try to discharge somebody that we don't feel has a place to go. And so it is very granular. It is very data driven. It is very person centered. It is very much knowing who is that person and what motivates them. And the cops and the outreach workers know these people personally. We have all been working on a strategy for a number of high profile people that we all see regularly. And so that kind of coordination and that plan to redeploy. And then if there's a plan like there is right now that is underway with DHS, I was on a call, Steve Banks, myself, Pat Warren, the chief security officer, Chief O'Reilly, to focus on the 34th Street corridor, above ground, underground, breaking ground, BRC, to focus on Penn Station, to focus on 34th Street, ACE, 123, and Herald Square. I'm not going to do those. I'm an IRT guy. What can I tell you? And an IND. And the BMT, I just never could get my head around. And
those are the ones with the most mezzanines.
Yes. And so we're all having coordinating sessions. When we were starting the end of line COVID, we would, I would be out every morning at Coney Island Stillwell, and we would have MTAPD, NYPD, all the commanders, the captain who was running each of those units, my so-called captain or team leader who was out there, because we have a hierarchy as well. And we deploy, kind of our patrol sergeants, if you will, and they're all coordinating and saying, where are we going to be working today? What's our strategy? What did we learn from the last time? How do we want to kind of redeploy our troops to get the maximum impact? We are doing that all the time. You
Well,
should
I
have
appreciate
confidence in
that.
that.
And again, I just
we
would
all
emphasize
appreciate
that perhaps
what you're doing.
during, the 7 to 11, 8 to 11 time, I've noticed just an increase in people laying on, and unfortunately using the subway for those reasons. And I would just think some coordination. I certainly understand the late night, you get someone at the end, but I would think some coordination, particularly on trains that may have some type of data to show that it's a quantity of people doing so, would make sense. The efforts together may be more impactful than individually, and that would just be something.
Yeah, and actually that 34th Street corridor strategy above and below ground is actually a daytime. It's a 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. initiative. It's not an overnight initiative. It's exactly for that recognition that not everything happens on the overnight shift. Absolutely. Okay. But what happens is we're dealing at a point in time right now where there is greater fragility, greater instability. Substance use is up nationally and internationally. People who have little hope are feeling more hopeless, are using substances more, are having psychiatric, issues. We're seeing that not just in the homeless population. We're seeing it in adolescents. We're seeing it in the elderly. We're seeing it, throughout our society. The mental health crisis and the use of substances, particularly as and again, I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just stating facts. And then, I think facts are important. How people interpret facts or judge facts is different. But it is an obvious fact that substance use has been decriminalized. I actually think that's a good thing. It is a disease. It is an illness. It needs to be treated, not punished. But there is a greater reliance on it right now than there has been. And again, nationally, across all populations. And that is a challenge that all of us are seeing before our eyes. We don't see it as clearly when it's, kids at home or whatever. It's a horrible crisis. But we see it in our face on the subways and on the street. And it is, like you said, we're all very empathetic. It's incredibly painful. The substance treatment capacity has diminished. The mental health capacity has diminished. When the hospitals pivoted to COVID, pretty much everything else stopped. And they basically converted the psych wards to COVID wards, and the substance wards, the residential inpatient treatment wards, they just stopped doing admissions by and large. And so we're seeing it.
That's like 10 good reasons that we hope COVID is behind us, and this unfortunate group of individuals can get the help and support and attention that they need and deserve. And the subway is not the place for them, obviously.
Right.
It's not a place to live. Muzzy and Leilani, we want to thank you for everything you're doing.
Yep.
I'm sure we'll be in touch moving forward to give you some updates and get some updates from you. But you're doing God's work, and thank you very much for it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to share and for your concern and your appreciation. Thank you. Good night.
Best of luck. Thank you.
Good to see you all. Have a good evening.
Bye, Leilani.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, Howard, we're moving to the, or Steve, or whoever wants to take this part, we're moving to the e-bike and e-scooter part of this meeting.
Andrew, we had another really quick agenda item before that, and that's enforcement. Specifically, we had some issues regarding 65th and Central Park West. There was a terrible crash there. And do we have anyone from the NYPD who can address that? Because that particular, maybe Colleen could help us. There needs to be on that particular intersection, since it's on the agenda, a dedicated left-hand turn arrow, because what happens is when cars are heading south, they make a mad dash through the going northbound traffic to go through the traverse in the park, and that mad dash is into an intersection for pedestrians who have the green walk light. And that's
we should have a left turn arrow. We have it at 86th Street and 81st Street probably. I think we should have one there for the transverse roads.
Yeah, so I think before we get into the e-bikes and e-scooters, we could just have a quick resolution of that agenda item.
And can I interject? Are you sure, Howard, there isn't a turning
Yes,
lane?
I'm sure. I live right there. It's very unfortunate. I've been in my car.
Not even going south?
No, that's where it's needed. When you're heading
That's where it's needed.
south and you want to make a left into going east into the traverse, so you're waiting there for a little gap in the traffic and you floor the accelerator to avoid the oncoming north traffic, and you go right into a pedestrian zone where pedestrians have green light.
Colleen, are you on?
There's a
Colleen?
green arrow there. There's a green arrow there. You can't go until there's a green arrow.
No,
Howard, can I just say a moment? You had jumped off the phone. I had requested that we flip the items because we have guest speakers for this one, and
I'm sorry.
that's why we did it. And I
Let's-
felt like those people then can leave, and we can continue to have that. But we have someone from Brad Hoyleman's office. Rita came as well, and I thought perhaps it would be respectful if we did this one and then the next one.
Agree completely.
And
Move on.
Howard, Captain Zuber may be on later, so that would be
Okay.
great. Yep.
Great.
Great. Well, Andrew, Andrew, it's yours to it's not my agenda item, but why don't you kick it off? And,
Well, we've gotten a number of communications, both texts and emails and what have you, about the scourge of almost getting hit by e-bikes and e-scooters, seeing them on sidewalks, in bike lanes, going the wrong way on various streets. Jay, who's got his hand raised, put together some facts that I emailed out to all committee members earlier today. Hopefully you've had a chance to peruse it and see what is legal and what is not. Jay, do you want to say something to that effect?
Jay, you're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, because of all the questions that have been arising, the issues that so many people are concerned with about e-bikes and what they can do, what they can't do, where they can go, et cetera. That's why I went, by the way, the first thing is everybody should understand, I expect they do, this is regulated by the state, not by the city. So all of the definitions and regulations and requirements, et cetera, are governed by the state vehicle and traffic law. And my first question, which luckily was answered because Ken was good enough to send us the link to the DOT's, I'll call it the e-bike explanation pages, for want of a better word. My first question would have been, what is the local New York City Police Department and DOT consider legal for e-bikes to traverse, whether they legally have access to the bike lanes, or whether they're required to operate in the rest of the roadways. And according to the DOT's website, they legally, according to the DOT, can operate in the bike lanes. With respect to the DOT, I disagree that is at all clear according to the state vehicle and traffic.
Well, Jay, we have Sam Vasquez from State Senator Brad Hoyleman's office on, who can speak to the law, if that helps you.
Yeah, if I can add as well. So Sam is the Assistant Legislative Director. He's here to speak to the law, and I think he's going to walk us through that. We also have several other electeds. Tevin Williams is from that office as well. Erica Overton is here from Linda Rosenthal's office. As Jay said, this is a state initiative, so I think they're very relevant. But Sam, if you could sort of give us the law 101 or kind of walk us through, we'd appreciate it.
Well, with respect to Sam and to Erica, and I say this not to tout my background, but I spent 16 years in the state legislature as counsel to the New York State Assembly and the last several years as the chief counsel to the speaker. And over that course of time, I suspect that I drafted, edited, and negotiated more pieces of legislation than our representatives put together. And if you don't mind, Stephen, I would like to express my concern, and that way Sam or Eric or anybody else I'd like to pinpoint what my concern is and where I think there's a problem. If you'd rather have them go first, fine. But
the feeling is that they could educate other people that hadn't read it and sort of done an introduction, and then you could ask them more specific questions. But I think they're, including myself.
I don't really have a question. What I have is
a concern,
an interpretation of the law. But you know, Andrew and you're running the meeting, so do.
I'm not running the meeting. I just asked Sam to speak to the thing. I guess. Fine. Again, why don't we let him speak,
I defer
and then we'll have.
To you.
Yeah, their time is limited. Let's hear from Sam, please.
Thank you, Sam.
Hi, everybody. Yep. So Sam from Senator Hoylman's office. You know, I'm happy to run through the basics of the state law. You're right that this is regulated at the state level. E-bikes were legalized in the executive budget, in the state budget in 2020. And there's some confusion, you know, around what exactly was included, because there was, prior to the budget, there was also some legislation that would legalize it that the governor ended up vetoing. And then it was ended up being legalized later in the budget. So it wasn't done through legislation per se, but through the budget process. And we, you know, we legalized 3 classes of bikes. E-bikes. There's the pedal assist bike that can go up to 20 miles per hour. These pedal assist bikes don't only activate the motor when you pedal. Then there's the throttle bike that can go up to 20 miles per hour. The throttle bikes are the ones that still have pedals, however, don't require the use of the pedal. The throttle is on the handle. You can turn it and it will activate the motor. These are you might have seen around the city. And then the third class is one that we often get the most questions about, which is the also throttle powered, and this one maxes out at 25 miles per hour. This is most likely the more popular e-bike for delivery drivers, since they are in such tight schedules and trying to deliver on a timely fashion. This category of bike is also required to use helmets. The other ones are recommended, and if you are, let me just double check, if you are 16 to 17 riding the other e-bikes, you are required to wear a helmet. But anybody that uses the class 3 is required to use a helmet. And then there's the e-scooter. These are the motorized electric scooters. These are capped at 15 miles per hour. They were also legalized statewide. However, this is another part that sometimes confuses folks, but there was a ride share carve out. So, you know, we've heard of the e-scooters sharing programs that have spread across the country, you know, and in many of our cities, where you can rent an e-scooter through your phone, you know, via some of the apps. And there's a number of brands that do this, including Lime and some other ones. That type of program was in the legalization was, we ended up carving out Manhattan. So those types of rental programs are not allowed in Manhattan at the moment, but they are allowed on the outer boroughs. So you might start seeing those soon in the outer boroughs. For e-scooters, helmets are required for 16 to 17-year-olds as well, and recommended for everyone else. That's the main the main scope of the legalization. While we regulate these bikes at the state level, the rules of the road are determined at the city level. So that it's kind of a joint effort on regulating. And my understanding is that e-bikes are also allowed to use the street in addition to the bike lanes. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Jay, is your hand raised with a question, or?
You're muted. You're muted, Jay. I can't hear you.
Jay, you're muted.
I would also say, before we get Jay, I would also say that, a lot of the behaviors that we see that are problematic and that folks are worried about, rightfully, are already illegal. Riding against traffic, riding on the sidewalk. These are behaviors that are already illegal. And it's a tricky question, obviously, but it's a question of enforcement.
It usually is.
Yeah. And so there's definitely a question as to, if what can be done there. And that's something that we should definitely discuss. And, that's something that, at the city level has to be.
Is that enforcement, Sam, NYPD or DOT enforcement?
Currently it's NYPD.
So it's Colleen. It has to be NYPD enforcement. It's Colleen Chattergoon from City DOT because DOT is not an enforcement agency.
Yeah.
Thank you, Colleen.
That makes perfect sense.
If I can, I have a question, Sam. When these I don't want to call them, when these electrically assisted bicycles were legalized, was it the intent of the legislature to allow them to operate in the bicycle lanes?
I believe so, yeah.
Then my question is, why didn't they change the definitions in the vehicle and traffic law of what a bicycle is and what is allowed in a bicycle lane? Because those two sections, in my opinion, are inconsistent with the usage of bicycles. Possibly you can make an argument that the class 1 electrically assisted ones may be legal because they require pedaling, but class 2 and class 3 can operate with on total electricity without pedaling, and the statute on what is defined as a bicycle lane doesn't include electric scooters at all. So in my opinion, operating a class 2 or class 3 electrically assisted bicycle in a bicycle lane is illegal. Operating an electric scooter in a bike lane is illegal. And I would also note that the class 3, which allows the bicycle on electric power only to go up to 25 miles an hour, and the scooter up to 20 miles an hour. But let me just point out quickly the definitions that I'm concerned about. The definition of a bicycle in the vehicle and traffic law is very specific. It says it's propelled by human power through a belt, a chain, or gears. Doesn't say anything about electricity. The definition of a bicycle lane, again, applies to bicycles, is a lane for the preferential or exclusive use of bicycles. And the basic definition of bicycle was never changed. And I think it behooves the city, certainly, for a host of reasons, including potential liability to, and it requires our state legislators to make up their minds. Do they want electrically assisted bicycles to operate in bicycle lanes, or don't they? If they do, they have to amend those two sections. Otherwise, at least two of those classes of electric bicycles are illegally operating in bike lanes. And frankly, with the incident that happened, that unfortunate incident where somebody was killed in a bike lane, I'm not giving anybody legal advice, but if I were, I would certainly tell them to consider the city's liability in permitting what I believe is an illegal vehicle to operate in that bike lane. So,
Jay, are you saying that the vehicle is illegal because it's motorized or because of its speed limit?
Because of it, I don't know. I confess ignorance. I don't know if speed limits on the streets, do they, I guess my question was, do they apply to bike lanes? But clearly, in my opinion, a class 2 or 3 electrically assisted bicycle, because they can be operated without human power as defined in the VMT law, are illegally operating in bicycle lanes.
Well, I hear you, and if you could share where in what section of law that you found that definition of bicycle, that would be helpful. I can't speak to that. I can bring that back to the office and see if we can get some more information on that. I would say, the intent of the legislation was to create a new class of bicycles. So basically, and legalize those. So my understanding is that the intent was, for these bikes to be electric bikes to be allowed in the bike lanes as the city has also determined.
So it's coming from DOT. On our website, we have a great fact sheet about scooter share. And one of the questions that is posed is, where are e-scooters permitted to ride? And it says riders may not ride on the sidewalk and may ride in bike lanes and on streets with speed limits no greater than 30 miles per hour. E-scooters should be operated and treated in the same way as bicycles. And what we have provided, we provided a link that has the rules of the road for cyclists and sharing the bike lanes.
Yeah, well, Colleen, and in answer to Sam's question, the definition of a bicycle lane is in section 102A of the Vehicle and Traffic Law. And it talks about the preferential or exclusive use of bicycles. Nowhere does it say electric scooters. So in my opinion, the DOT's website is touting an illegal use of electric scooters by saying that they can be operated in bike lanes. Again, if that's the intent of the state legislature to allow them, they need to amend section 102 and 102A of the VMT law to make that clear.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
I know what you're saying, Jay. There's a conflict there. I understand what you're saying. And
Yeah.
you do have a point. You do have a point, yes.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, putting aside for the moment whether me or the community board or the population at large thinks that they should be operated in bike lanes, that's a policy issue. But right now, there is a legal conflict in the language in the Vehicle and Traffic Law. And if the state legislators, wish to allow these various types of transportation to operate in bike lanes, they need to say so. And they need to say so clearly. And if that's their position, so be it. And we need to have, beyond this legal discussion, a discussion on our board and generally as to whether we think it's a good idea for a mode of transportation going 25 or 30 miles an hour to be operating in a bike lane. My personal
They are capped at 25.
not.
It says no greater than 30 miles. I mean, 30 miles.
No greater than 30, Colleen, means you can go 30 miles an hour
No,
on an electrically assisted piece of equipment that you don't have to pedal.
Let me jump in there. The e-scooters are capped at 15 and
I'm sorry, but the law
class
says
three-
by definition, the maximum speed of an electric scooter is 20 miles an hour.
It's
Section-
15.
It's section 114E.
We have to call on some other
20
folks
miles
if
an hour.
possible now. There's quite a few hands raised on this. But first, let me ask, Erica, did you want to add anything from Assemblymember Rosenthal's office?
Sorry. I think Sam explained it. I also just to clarify though, I thought the municipality decides where they operate. So why can't DOT or the city say not in a bike lane if that is causing issues? If they're
It's
not
up to the municipality. Yeah.
The answer to that is section 102A
Thanks,
of
Jack.
the state vehicle and traffic law defines what a bicycle lane is, not the city. It's not city law.
It's up to the state. Okay.
And again, Jay made an interesting opening remark where he mentioned that this law is regulated by the state and not the city.
Exactly. Let me get some other questions here. Irena?
Actually, it's thank you, Andrew. It's more of a comment. Maybe there's a question in there. I think that the legislature sort of, I know this is going to be a little controversial, but they really they passed legislation without really thinking about whether it would be adequately or properly enforced. Sam said something very telling during his presentation, which is that many of these app-based delivery companies that rely on motorized bicycles and scooters, the business model is speed, whether it's DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever it is. The driver makes their money based on speed. They have to get to each person's home and then pick up another order. So they're not interested in 15, 20, whatever it is. The fact of the matter is whether they're motorized or not, they are speeding. They are not stopping for lights. They are not stopping for pedestrians. I've almost been hit twice in my neighborhood. They've become a menace, and there's no enforcement whatsoever. So the state passed legislation permitting these motorized vehicles into communities and neighborhoods without any forethought about how they were going to be enforced. They don't generally have any kind of license. There was someone, I think it was Peter, who said they should be trained and licensed. They're motorized vehicles, they're not licensed. And so there's no recourse. I mean,
They should have license plates so they can be traced.
Exactly, Andrew. There's just, it's like they introduce these vehicles onto the street and I don't know what they were expecting, but I'm very concerned about it. And I think if someone is visually impaired or if someone has a hearing impairment and they're trying to get across the street, particularly if there's a bike lane, they're in trouble. And most of these drivers are not, they don't have any way of, except for yelling, telling you that they're coming. But the thing that bothers me the most is that they're not stopping for traffic lights at all. Very rarely will any of these, I watch them all the time. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate that the state representative staff is on this at the meeting today. And I hope that what you carry back is that you've introduced legislation, you've introduced these vehicles into our neighborhoods, but you didn't think about how you were going to enforce them. And I hope something comes out of this meeting. And I don't want to criminalize people, but I also want to protect our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrew, if I can just supplement that quickly by pointing out that in addition to what Arena just said, the vehicle and traffic law, which has standards for safety responsibility, financial responsibility, equipment inspections, and so forth, none of that applies to electric bikes, none of it, or an electric scooter.
Wow.
Which means that, for example, that poor man who was killed by an electric bike may have absolutely no recourse because the operator of that bike had no requirement to have insurance or other financial responsibility. There's a plethora of problems that legalizing these bikes has caused, and it needs to be a subject of discussion, and our state representatives need to be aware of all these things and consciously decide what they want to be applicable, what laws, what rules, what regulations, what safety regulations, what financial regulation, what registration regulations apply, because right now, none of them apply to
that's really a problem.
Means of transportation.
We may want to summarize all of those points, Jay, and
they summarized in the memo that I sent to you to circulate to the members of the committee.
Right. Well, we may want to circulate it to all of the state elected officials and say this is a problem. Ken, you were next.
Oh, okay.
Wait, I just want to make sure.
Can I just chime in?
Wait, I just want to make sure we're done with the presentations, because before we come up with solutions, we have to fully understand the problem. So I just want to make sure we're in the Q&A period right now.
Yeah, could I just, before just one last word, I just wanted to say I think there's a little bit of confusion around what is state and what is city regulation. And, when these bikes were, legalized in the state budget, they were allowed municipalities to regulate the use for the specific local conditions. So it's, the state legalization does not preclude the city from enacting any rules around the use of these bikes. So just wanted to make that clear.
Just to be clear, so if the city wanted to say they cannot go in the protected bicycle lane, the city could.
Yeah, and that's something that the city would have to determine. It's the rules of the road are determined at the city level.
They can be. Yes, Howard, they can be.
Yes. Question. Okay.
The city can be
next.
stricter.
Ken is next.
Wait, Ken's next.
Yeah. So I don't know, are we in the discussion phase of this, or are we still asking questions? Because I would like to respond. I don't happen to agree with some of what has been said. So I want to make sure I have an opportunity to weigh in on this, but I also,
This is your time to make a comment, Ken,
All
or
right.
ask a question.
I think we're done with the presentation.
Okay.
It was just to clarify, it was my understanding, and we went over the agenda, that Rita was going to be able to speak for Helen Rosenthal's office, and we just been off the agenda, but that's what we discussed it for. So if you're asking, it's my understanding.
Maybe Rita can add something before we get to the discussion.
Yeah, why don't we have all the presentations and then we could have the discussion.
Rita?
Rita?
Hi.
Thank you for attending.
Hi, so I'm from Councilmember Helen Rosenthal's office, and our office was asked about what we're hearing from constituents about bicycling in general. And just to give a little background on how our office works. So our responsibilities are organized by complaint categories. And just like we have seniors and vaccines and unemployment, whether they're state or city, we have people assigned to those categories, and bicycling complaints were assigned to me. I've now been with the council member for several years, but just in general, just have noticed an uptick in bicycling complaints, primarily from people stepping off the curb into the street, seeing that bicycles are either one, going the wrong way on either Columbus Avenue or Amsterdam Avenue, two, not stopping at all for the red lights, and three, just going way too fast. Now, we don't know how fast is, but for someone stepping into the street, fast could be 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour, and it could be really fatally hurt. So we don't have good access on 311, unfortunately, because the 311 data does not point to significant what the specific issues are when people are crossing the streets. It just more points to broad issues about pedestrians and safety. But we, as an office, have actually, we take emails, we take phone calls, and in the past 2 years, specifically even in the past year, we have seen an uptick of about 5 to 10 emails per week, closer to 10 when we're talking about warmer weather, 20 to 40 complaints per month. And these are all unique people. These are not repeat callers. So that's pretty significant. That's, if you're looking at the warmer months, 40 a month, that's close to 500 complaints a year that we're seeing. And we in the office are continually telling people to call 311 when we know that 311 is not organizing the information in a way that we can pull data from it. And the council member actually earlier on in her first term did an education campaign, which helped a little bit, but not a lot. And what we like to do is look at ways to work with CB7 on educating bicyclists, scooters, everyone out there that's on the street. We're all sharing one street, and pedestrians have the same rights as do bicyclists, but unfortunately, pedestrians have a lot less strength when they cross into the street. They are going to be hurt. Bicyclists get hurt too, obviously, but that's why everyone has to follow the rules of the road, so to speak. So I think education is a good start, actually. I know there's a lot of discussion now about the state and about enforcement, but in terms of really getting people on the same page as to how to be kind to one another and respectful to one another on the roads, that's really what our office would like to start with.
Why don't we go to the questions?
Okay, was I next?
Yes, Ken, you're next.
Okay. Well, first of all, I assume that Jay is implicitly arguing for a separate lane for e-vehicles, which I would be all for. We'll take out another lane of motor vehicle traffic and make that exclusively for e-vehicles. I think that would really help to address these problems. And I hope Jay will support me in a resolution in favor of that.
Just to correct you, I'm not advocating a separate lane for e-vehicles.
Oh, I'm shocked, Jay.
We talked about keeping it cordial, and I think, there's often when people speak loudly that there's a conversation, but I think sometimes we can quietly do it as well. I think you know Jay's answer, and why don't we, Ken, I'm sure you have some very good comments, and why don't you go ahead?
Okay, it was this is changing the population of users of our streets, the rise of these e-vehicles, and change is always disorienting. And of course, there's going to be an uptick in complaints. We should expect it, but ultimately it's for the good. no form of transportation is entirely risk-free, but the safety risk that is posed by electric vehicles is minuscule compared to the risk posed by cars, trucks, and buses. And it more closely resembles the much, much lower risk that traditional bicycles pose on the roads. Every car trip that is replaced by an electric vehicle will make New York City safer for all road users. That's just a fact. Every year here on the Upper West Side, we have on average 2 or 3 deaths from motor vehicles and hundreds of people seriously injured, hundreds by motor vehicles. By contrast, in 2018, there were 11,115 pedestrians injured by vehicles. 9 of those were struck and hurt by an e-bike. That's a rate of 0.08% of all pedestrian injuries. So the best way we can address feelings of fear is through not through enforcement, which tends to be very discriminatory and tends to target people of color and immigrants. The best way is through physical infrastructure, which has been empirically proven to significantly improve safety for all street users. Everybody knows where they're supposed to be and they have their own lane. And so I wasn't actually joking when I was proposing ultimately what we should be thinking about is e-vehicle lanes. But in the meantime, they belong in the bike lanes because they're part of the same species. They're not horribly destructive and lethal the way that cars, trucks, and buses are.
I would respond, but Steve will shut me
Great,
up.
we're going in order. The next person is Rich Robbins.
Thank you, Howard. I think we're missing the point here. I hate e-bikes. I hate when I'm riding with them. I'm a regular cyclist and I feel like they're cheating and I don't like them, but I don't think the issue is e-bikes or how a bike is getting its power. The issue is speed. And a strong cyclist with human power can go much faster than an e-bike, especially if it's regulated at 20 miles per hour. Also, if you walk into a bike store, many of the new bikes have batteries and you can't even really tell the difference. And these new e-bikes allow older and less fit people to get around the city, often not that quickly. Again, the issue is speed, not what's powering the bike. I think, and I've said many times, we can't tolerate riding on the sidewalk or riding the wrong way. I think that creates dangers that just aren't acceptable. Especially with open dining, I'm really concerned, and I'd like to see the NYPD crack down on riding the wrong way in the bike lanes in Amsterdam and Columbus. I'm really concerned that there are fatalities waiting to happen. If bikes go the wrong way, people don't think to look and walk out into a bike lane when someone's going the wrong way. But I also think we need to look at how the bike is being used, regardless of whether it's electric or human powered. And I think there's just a world of difference between spandex riders who are on fancy road bikes riding around for exercise. They can go very fast. They can be very dangerous. I've seen people out for exercise fly through crowds of people in a completely unacceptable way. And that just can't be tolerated and is really risky. One challenge there is they're very difficult to catch, and we don't want the NYPD to engage in high-speed chases. But what I worry is if we say, like, oh, we need more enforcement of bicycles, they're not going after the spandex riders going 30 miles per hour through crowds of people. They're going to go after people riding 5 miles per hour because they're easier to catch. I've also said many times, delivery cyclist is a unique issue. It's completely separate from the spandex riders. And it's not an issue of whether they're human powered or battery powered. The issue is the business model, as Arana said. These people are forced to ride the wrong way to get to deliveries and make quick deliveries. And they're just creating danger with several of the services to get a sense of how it works. I tried an hour last night before the Howard housing meeting and rode all over the Upper West Side. I stopped and waited at every red light saw a number of cars run red lights in the process. And because I did that, I got 0 orders in that hour and I made $0. So there's clearly an incentive to break the law. And that's not the rider's fault, that's the business model. It's people ordering the food and expecting it to show up in a few minutes. And it's these third-party services. There also already is a law that businesses need to provide licenses and lights to delivery riders, but these third-party services are hiring the riders as independent contractors. I had to sign an agreement saying I'm an independent contractor, not an employee. I did get a nice mask. I got a bottle of hand sanitizer and a nice insulated bag. I did not get lights. I did not get a license. And I got a contract saying, hey, you're on your own. You got to just make do on your own. DoorDash did not even give me any information about the law about licenses or lights. Also, this point about, I hear that, we're getting a lot of complaints. The elected officials are getting a lot of complaints. It's a question, do we listen to the complaints or do we look at data? And, we know the data that the vast majority of injuries and of fatalities are caused by motor vehicles, not by bikes. And we do have a recent fatality caused in the bike lane, which is tragic. Every fatality is tragic. I think we need to learn more information about that. And once we know what happened, was it the pedestrian's fault? Was it the bike's fault? See what we might be able to do to make sure that never happens again. But, if we look at the comparison, if you're looking at a data analysis, if you're focusing on bikes, you're not going to be solving the issue of how dangerous the roads are. And we need to be smart and make sure that we're focused on whatever we can do to make our streets as safe as possible.
Thank you, Rich. Christian and then Doug Kleiman.
Okay, I don't want to repeat what a lot of people have said already, but I agree. In terms of injury problems, the bicycles are a heck of a lot more safer and much less dangerous than cars. Nonetheless, there's still incidents happening, so we still also have to address those. We cannot just ignore it. So we do have to address the problem with bicycles also. It's not as serious. It's much less serious than cars, definitely. But we still have to address it. I just want to add one more type of complaint. I've been seeing, particularly in Central Park West, motorbikes like rebel type bikes, licensed and unlicensed, using the bicycle lane. And I think that really is illegal. And that's something that only enforcement will be able to solve that one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Doug?
Thanks. I really appreciate the fact that we're defining things. I appreciate Jay's research. I appreciate Ken's. And it's good to know what the laws are and what conflicts are in the law. I'd like to talk about a different set of laws called the laws of physics. And I think as a practical conversation, what I've been observing, and I'm from this city, and by the way, congratulations to Rich for really kind of doing that experiment. I hope you make some money on it while you're doing it. I've had, I think, the distinction of being the only person on the board that actually was a delivery person in this neighborhood years ago. There goes Rich's with his mask on. And it is something to be experienced. And I'd love to hear what Rich has to say as he goes through that. So the law has to be parsed out and delineated. And of course, the laws respond to circumstances and things that happen. I want to say that I've heard this many, many times. Yes, cars, trucks, and buses kill more people. They are faster, they are heavier, they are more deadly. But this is not a binary conversation. This is not a mutually exclusive situation. We are talking about tonight e-bikes and all the different categories of e-bikes. And so, yes, I agree and concede. Cars are very dangerous, and so are trucks and buses, but that's not the topic right now. We can so we should absolutely continue to enforce motor vehicle infractions. They are deadly. So stipulated. The issue is, number one, at the least concern is the quality of life and a fear that people that are particularly more vulnerable have. Elderly people, people with young children, people that are hearing impaired, and I can go on. And so even if the data is not there, which by the way, I dispute, but even if there's no data to say that nobody is getting hurt with e-bikes or bicycles, people are scared. That's a quality of life issue, and we have to address it. It is scary, and it raises people's blood pressure. We've talked about environmental justice. We've talked about what it's like to be living in a state of fear. I'm from this neighborhood for 55 years. I've never been more fearful of bikes, yes, and cars. So we need to address that at a minimum. But in the reality is, yes, there are accidents, and yes, someone was killed by an e-bike. This is real, on 77th and Amsterdam Avenue. I do not know the classification of that bike. I do not know the specific circumstances, and I agree it is tragic. So it's something, it's real, and we got to deal with it. By the way, something was said respectfully that bikers have, the same rights as pedestrians. No, they do not. Pedestrians have the right of way. They actually have more rights in some respects. I do ride a bike. I'm a Citibank member. I have my own bike. I am a licensed driver. I'm a pedestrian. I even fly an airplane. So I have a lot of, and I can just tell you that I love all the modes of transportation, and I'm an avid biker, but I am scared riding on the bike lane. So I believe it was Sam who said there are many laws already on the books, but many of them are not being enforced. So I see every single day of the week, red light infractions, failure to yield, wrong turns, not yielding to pedestrians, riding on the sidewalk, riding the wrong way. I started off by saying laws of physics. You don't have to be a physics major to know that if you have a 25-mile-an-hour bicycle or e-bike and they're going in the same direction and they have an impact, that's a 50-mile-an-hour impact. That's deadly. So wrong way vehicles, any kind, whether they're lawful in the bike lane or not. I have personally also, it happens all the time where we have the other classifications that we were talking about of mopeds and motorcycles in these bike lanes all the time. So that's something else. I apologize if I'm laundry listing here, but as people were talking, I was just taking notes. So I believe that we can work together. I don't want to vilify any one type of vehicle or anyone riding that vehicle. Safety is our part of our community board. I don't want to say motto, but our mandate. And we need to figure out a way to all be safer. And I think enforcement is one, education is another. So I'll shut up now, but I'd love to hear what everybody else has to say. I think if we all work together, safety is the main goal for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. As you pointed out.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying Steve's next. And I was wondering, I think that's it for the community board members. Is there anyone from the community who has a hand up?
There is. Yeah.
Okay. So Steve, why don't you go and then we can.
Well, I was going to say the same thing. I'll go last, but I want to make sure we get the community. And I know I don't see a hand up.
Yeah, I don't either.
But I do know that Sally Petrick sent me numerous emails before this, and I'm just concerned that maybe she doesn't know how to raise her digital hand because Mark saw that email as well. I don't want to just choose on her, but Sally, I don't know if you know how to raise your digital hand, if that's something you want to speak again, but she did send me numerous emails saying that they planned on speaking. Sally, I'm gonna, if everyone is okay, I'm gonna unmute Sally for a minute and just see if she wants.
Yes, please.
On that. So Sally, you could speak if you so desire.
Actually, what I'm hearing is just so similar to what I had sent. I did send quite a few people my concerns, complaints, and I'm mainly here to, everything that I'm hearing is stuff that probably I wrote or I've certainly thought of. So I'm more interested in hearing what people, how they're addressing it, and because I have no interest in just complaining. I like Doug, I just want to, it's a problem and I'd like to see it solved, and whatever I can do, I'd like to do. But for me, just listening to this is great. It's really, I appreciate it.
Sure, I did want to honor our communication. So there you had your say. Okay, well, I'll give my sort of brief thoughts, and a lot of it has been spoken. So I'll be, there's two things that I'd say. Number one, I've often said that I bike often, and my preference is that I'm very uncomfortable with e-bikes going 25 miles in the bike lane, and it'd be my desire not to have them. That's as simple as I could say that I think they were inappropriately allowed to be so. I don't want to get into the whole classification because I think it makes it more complex, but the city bike pedals, I'm less adverse to. I think the hand throttles that are allowed to get up to 25 miles an hour, I think just shouldn't be in bike lanes. I would rather them be where moped is. I view them as mopeds, and physically, I think they're roughly the same size. And I would be in favor of a future conversation. Well, first of all, I'm sharing that with my local politicians, that they hear that and would like them to reconsider it. And I would consider trying to have some conversation about that specific issue. I'm uncomfortable being in a bike lane with a 25 mile an hour e-bike whizzing by me, whether it's the right direction or the wrong direction. And then the second thing I just want to pick up on Rita said, I think Rita put an opportunity on the table. I feel we often talk at each other a lot at this committee. You know, there is a conversation to have about education. I did notice, if you saw the weekend that the accident happened, the police were out with an informational campaign. They put it on their site. They were handing out pamphlets. And I would like us to consider trying to coordinate something with an education program. I always remember, Ken, you said something once that there would sort of be a self-policing when we reach a certain level, and I hope that happens. I know that I yell at every single person that goes the wrong way, so I'm doing my best. But we're often yelling at each other, and if there's a way for us to come up with what would be an acceptable thing is some type of education campaign, I'd like us to think about that, because that's at least trying to take a step forward, and that would not be enforcement, but nor, I don't know, whether we're handing out, I know that the 20th was handing out sort of pamphlets on Amsterdam and Columbus over a period of time and just educating. I think it was focused on not going the right way and things like that. But I would ask that we try and consider that and do something, because I think that would be constructive. Those are my comments.
Great.
Anyone else? Andrew, all yours.
Well, I think an education campaign is great. I don't know who would conduct that campaign. Would it be the Department of Transportation? Would it be the NYPD? Would it be a combination of those?
It could be a combination. The NYPD did a campaign, or they at least did a couple hours. It was put up, and then I texted someone over there and said, yeah, we did that. I don't know, Rita, if you want to come offer an idea. I know you sort of suggested perhaps some type of education campaign. I'm not sure if you thought about logistics on that, but perhaps there's a conversation to be had coordinating with Rita in the office as well. But
yeah, I think this is best handled. This is clearly a good idea. The logistics of it and the specifics of it, we should handle offline with people who are interested in working on that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, actually.
If I might add one thing. So the idea behind the education campaign, much like the Department of Consumer Affairs is doing with street vendors, it is a different topic, but they are starting a couple of months of an education campaign followed by an enforcement. So in other words, if you've repeatedly done the education and the education doesn't seem to be making a difference, then we go into the enforcement. So we like the idea of education because it gives everyone a chance to understand what they need to do the right thing when they're on the road. So yeah, we can talk offline about ideas.
Yeah, I think we should talk about that, because it's, as you've correctly said, the first step is to figure out what the education will be and what exactly we want to request. That's the first step in the process.
And how to undertake it, yes.
Right.
then I'll just tell Jay that I have Sam and Kevin's information, and there can be a follow-up about some of the specifics that you wanted to discuss regarding the law.
Thank you, Stephen. Absolutely.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, I think what Rita just said, I think the key thing is there. You do the education, and if that doesn't work, you do the enforcement. I don't know why we wouldn't do enforcement and education at the same time. Enforcement is really important at this point with so many people doing the wrong thing. Everybody's a pedestrian, whether you bike, take mass transit, or drive. At some point, you're a pedestrian, and pedestrians are in danger. Mark,
Thanks. Well, now that you're talking about education, the one thought that occurred to me as I was listening was that many, not all, of the people we're talking about in terms of dangerous riding that scares people, and I'll dodge the issue of statistics about injury versus not injury, but picking up the issue about scaring people, involve delivery cyclists as opposed to recreational cyclists or other kinds of cyclists. So maybe it would make sense to do this education contemplation and initiative in conjunction with BCI, and then reach out to the restaurants that are employing these folks. I don't know what you do about the Grubhubs and Caviars of this world where they don't actually work for the restaurants. It's almost the other way around, where the restaurants work for them. But anyway, maybe that's a thought to supplement what you're contemplating.
Thank you for that.
Yes, we certainly would value their input. And when it comes to actually disseminating the information, they would be very, they play an important role.
We will keep everybody posted on the efforts to educate and what that will look like and what form that will take, because this is of great concern to everybody who's a West Sider, obviously. I do believe we need to move on to the enforcement issue that Howard raised, which was item 2 at one point, and we moved it up because we had speakers, but enforcement is still important.
Enforcement seems to be the dominant theme through almost all of our issues.
Yeah, it really does.
This is particularly came up in connection with that one intersection at 65th and Central Park West, and yes, there is a dedicated left turn arrow, but you are allowed to make the left-hand turn when that green arrow is not on. And that's when all of the trouble happens. And so, Colleen, if it would be possible to have a red arrow, the green arrow is great. If we can have a red arrow at that intersection.
So there's a period when you cannot make the turn.
Right.
Yes.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Howard, just a point of clarification. I take this route to work every morning. There's a green arrow to turn left, and you can't turn left on the green arrow. You can't turn left until that green arrow comes up. Most drivers wait, and when the green arrow comes up, they turn left and they cross the transverse road. And this happens on both north and southbound. So I'm a little confused as to I'm a little confused by your setup.
Arena, here's the issue. There is definitely a green left turn arrow, but there is also a regular green light.
Yes.
There is no red left turn arrow at that time. So folks can still make the left turn when it's a regular green light, as opposed to the green turn arrow.
But most drivers, okay.
Most drivers, but not all.
I take this route every morning, and all of the drivers are waiting to cross the transverse road for that green light, for the green arrow. Like, I rarely see anyone making that turn before the green arrow, but I guess to Howard's point, he lives in the neighborhood, he must see it all the time.
Oh, I don't see it, I do it. The reason why people don't make the left-hand turn, I live right there, is because the traffic's coming north. But if this is my point, if there's a break in that traffic, you floor someone floors the accelerator to go into the park to avoid the north-coming traffic. And that creates a particularly dangerous. So all we're saying is that to just make the signal, put the signals in accordance with the way you understand them, that if that green left-hand turn signal is not on, they should not be charging through the intersection to make the left-hand turn.
And we do have intersections with red arrows telling you for sure you cannot make that turn.
Or merely a sign that says you can't turn until you see the green right turn the green arrow.
Exactly.
So
a sign would be fine.
Yeah. So
there's only 4 transverse roads through the park. We got to make them as safe as we can.
Yeah.
It's Colleen from DOT. So if the board sends me a letter on a CB letterhead, we'll be more than happy to look at that.
Is there any objection to doing it by a mere letter rather than a formal resolution?
Can I have my hand?
Don't need a formal resolution. You can just send me an admin letter on your
We're happy to do that.
CB letterhead. Okay.
Ken has a question.
Yeah, if people remember the left turn discussion a couple of months ago, this would be a perfect place for a split phase, which means that pedestrians have a don't walk anytime a car has either a left turn arrow, has the left turn arrow. So in addition to having the left turn arrow, we would have no legal possibility for a pedestrian to cross there. Otherwise, or a cyclist. And a cyclist was hit there a couple of weeks ago and seriously injured. So this would be a great place for a split phase. I hope we can add that to the letter.
Agreed. Okay. Anything else on that? Then we have new business. Any new business?
Anybody have an item of new business? Doug.
Doug and then Ken.
Okay. Ken, you want to go first? It's fine with me. Okay. Well, just as we were speaking, the gang, I'm going to call it a gang, of the reckless ATVs and motorcycles just went up Amsterdam Avenue.
Oh, God.
So we had a nice conversation, I believe the last time, with the commanding officers, and they, in fact, Deputy Inspector Yaguchi mentioned that there was some investigation and some things afoot, and I'm encouraged by that. I had thought that maybe I would introduce a resolution, but I actually think that what I'd like to do, even though I do trust that the NYPD is going to pursue this because it's getting more and more prevalent, I would like to suggest that we write a letter supporting all safe means of enforcing this absolutely illegal behavior. We're not proposing any new laws. It's dangerous, it's deadly, and it's also very stressful, it's very loud. And by the way, all of us people that care so much about the environment, which we do, those are not regulated vehicles, so they're not subject to emission standards. They're blowing smoke all over the place, and that's the least of the problems. So I would like us to write a letter basically asking for greater enforcement to stop this behavior, and of course, with great sensitivity to doing it in the safest way. I just sort of a little extra enforcement, if you will, that the NYPD will actually do that, and the community board.
Yeah, I think the commanding officer of the Central Park precinct led us to believe that there were enforcement efforts that will be underway, and did not want to describe what they were per se, in order to not make them public. But this is a scourge. I mean, I was sitting at an outdoor restaurant on Amsterdam, outdoor seating, and a horde of these ATVs and dirt bikes came by. The forward wheel was up. They were on one wheel. They cannot possibly see what's directly in front of them when they're in that position.
They are violating so many existing laws that it isn't even funny. And they are heavy vehicles. They're four-wheelers. They're three-wheelers.
They're unlicensed. There's a host of problems. They're going to kill somebody. There's no doubt about it.
And by the way, they may kill themselves, and I don't want to see that happen either. But I would like us to be on the record for saying that we would like this behavior to stop. And I understand that this is an issue throughout the 5 boroughs, not just our.
Oh, I've seen them in Brooklyn.
And as I mentioned, I think at another meeting, that this has also been a problem even in New Jersey. And the public safety officer announced, and I can share the video with everybody, that they had a very successful operation, an ongoing operation. And they're using.
Are they legal in New Jersey?
No.
Because sure?
Absolutely not. They were. In fact, they talk in the news story about how they took the vehicles and they destroyed them, and that there were some arrests made and some violations. But these are not inspected vehicles.
They're fueling up somewhere, Doug.
That's right. So they're unconventional means, and I think we received the message from the commanding officers about how this is going to be more of an investigation than sort of apprehension on the street level, which is great, and I think that's the safe way to do it. But I just like us to be on the record for saying that this, I can't imagine this is controversial in the least, but.
No, I can't. If you want to draft something, we'll certainly look at it. You've made a lot of great points in your discussion.
Thank you.
We're going to take comments, of course.
Yeah.
Irena.
Doug, thank you for bringing this up, this item up. You know, Atlanta had a similar problem with cars. Young people were outfitting their cars so that they could race. And they were doing it, you know, in the neighborhood and putting their lives at danger and the lives of their neighbors in danger. And what the mayor of that city did was she identified a location where they could in fact race safely. And so I think if the cars are if the ATVs are legal, if the motorcycles are legal, if they're licensed, perhaps the city should seriously think about where in the 5 boroughs young people can go and run these things. I think that they're dangerous for all the reasons that have been articulated.
That's part of the thrill, to zoom through busy trafficked areas, of course.
Exactly. So
they've
maybe
got a big grin on their face.
Maybe the city should be thinking about where they could allow this kind of activity, this kind of sport to take place safely, away from out of neighborhoods and out of communities and roads where you have buses and cyclists and other modes of transportation. But going back to Ken's point, Ken's always reminding us that we don't have to criminalize every single activity that may in fact be dangerous. But and I'm not doing so well paraphrasing you, Ken, but I think this is another situation where maybe what the city should be looking at is where people can do this activity safely. And because I think what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of black and brown, and we know, let's call it for what it is. There are a lot of black and brown kids on these bicycles. But if you go to some of the suburbs, you've got young white kids with ATVs too, but they have a place to ride these ATVs. Young black kids didn't come up with ATVs. They were popular in the suburbs way before they got to New York City. So I'm just saying that in whatever letter or resolution is passed, I just think we should also say to the city, look, if young people want to engage in ATVs, let's find a place in the city for them to do it. I'm sure somebody can figure out a business model for this and find some land and put some tracks in and let these kids have a ball. But let's just not pass a resolution or a letter that is just, let's enforce these guys and confiscate their ATVs. Let's figure out a way that they can do it safely.
I didn't think they were legal in the city of New York.
I don't know if they are, and if they're not, then they shouldn't be.
And let's do a hypothetical, Irena. Let's say the city said, you have a racing area in Floyd Bennett Field, so you're far from it.
Exactly.
What's to stop them from taking the ATVs and racing them down Flatbush Avenue to get to Floyd Bennett Field?
It goes back to the earlier conversation. It has to be an educational process. Well, there has to be, you bring these people together and you have a conversation and you say, look, guys, you're putting yourselves in danger, as Doug said, you're putting the community residents in danger, motorists in danger, but we know you want to ride these things. How can we get you out there to Floyd Bennett Field or wherever so you can ride these things safely?
Well, let's look into the legality of them, if they're even allowed in the city of New York, and let's see what.
Yeah, I agree.
What can be done?
I agree. I mean, listen, I hear them, I see them, I cringe, but I'm just trying to strike a balance here, and think of a creative solution besides enforcement.
Okay, can I just respond to that respectfully? I know I see other people's hands up, but since
Go ahead, Doug.
First of all, these bikes are not legal on the street, period, end of story. They're not registered, they're not insured, there's no emission standards, they are not street legal. They are illegal bikes in the city of New York. I love motocross racing, I like motorcycles, but they are taking, their track is pretty much the 5 boroughs, because sometimes they're crossing the street. There's no new law here. We're talking about enforcing laws. If we saw Mini Coopers that were all 70 of them were driving up Amsterdam and going through red lights, and by the way, they're on bike lanes too, and doing wheelies or whatever, we would be horrified. That's essentially what's happening with smaller vehicles. But so yes, I would love people to have, but let me just say something else. There's characteristically something else. I actually feel, because I've seen a lot of them, I videotaped them. They are grinning. In fact, they are. A high-ranking police officer told me, and I may have shared this story with you before, that they were on a radio call for a real emergency. I believe it was a domestic violence emergency. They were racing to aid someone, and they came upon the crowd of motorcyclists. The motorcyclists basically stopped the police car, slowed down the police car, and then all had their cameras taking selfies, presumably showing that it looked like the police were following them. When the police officer actually got on the PA and said, "We are not following you, we're going to an emergency call," they are putting their thumbs in the face of the rest of our community and the NYPD. I am colorblind about this. I don't care. I don't even know some of them have helmets, some of them don't. I understand what you're saying on the optics, but this is too critical of a situation. This is.
Doug, I think you misunderstood what I'm saying. I totally agree with you. I'm not condoning the behavior. What I'm saying is, in addition to enforcement, if this is an activity that young people want to do, in addition to enforcement, be creative about figuring out an outlet for them to do it. If they're illegal, if they're not licensed, get them off the street. But what I'm saying is, if it's possible, if we know that people want to do it, then let's figure out a way for them to do it safely. Let's figure out a way to do it safely. I'm not saying don't enforce. I'm not condoning it. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm just trying to think creatively about how to address this activity that clearly quite a number of young people want to do throughout the 5 boroughs.
I think what Irene is saying is we have a variety of sticks. If we could throw a carrot in the mix, that would be a positive thing.
I think one of the thrill of doing this is because it's illegal and it's in people's faces. They all have a big grin on their face, and they're picking the most crowded avenues to do it.
Yeah, and let me just also share with you that one of the reasons in the past 2 weeks you've seen a proliferation is because a rap artist named DMX died. And DMX, he was probably one of the first rap artists that introduced the ATVs. The Rough Riders, that was their logo, was basically these ATVs. And it became part of the hip hop culture. And when he died, all over the country, these young kids came out in these ATVs. 2 Saturdays ago, his memorial was at Barclays, and they were all out there in memory of DMX. So you've got that as an underpinning. I agree with you, Doug. It's dangerous. We've got to get it, and especially with the summer coming, it's only going to grow. I totally agree with you. I'm just saying, if people want to do it, to Howard's point, let's figure out a way to get them off the streets into some safe areas. But I didn't mean to suggest that I condone it.
It wasn't dangerous. Okay. We get it.
Just let me say, there are 2 people with their hands raised. We're all in agreement. This is a problem. We have to give some thought to how to rein it in. And maybe again, Ken and then Rich will speak. But maybe, Doug, you could draft a letter and we would all sign on to the letter and make the NYPD, who is ultimately in charge of enforcing this, come up with some way to enforce this, maybe show some creativity or again, if the variety of sticks, maybe they could throw in a carrot. But I think that would be the next step in this process.
Howard, I'm just letting you know also that a community member after the two board members.
Yeah, we see the hand. Yep.
And Rich, and then the community member.
Okay, I really appreciate Irena's perspective on this because what she's doing is making us sort of see their humanity. And it's not just they're doing something illegal kind of thing. She's right. This is an outlet. I can actually think of worse outlets. There is probably it's not a coincidence that this is happening in the midst of a pandemic when there are many, many people unemployed. And it's a subculture. But I think the best thing that we could do, and something that we haven't really discussed yet, is start a conversation. Find out who these people are, why they think they're doing it, rather than just say, oh, this is bad, it's scaring us, and we're going to get rid of it because we don't like it. Let's find out more. Let's start a conversation.
How about we're going to get rid of it because somebody's going to get killed?
Well, people, Andrew, people are already getting killed by cars on our streets every single day. So
can we not have a discussion where cars are always the villain?
No, but just if you're going to bring that up, that seems to me like a more important conversation.
Too, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't get rid of subway crime. There's always something worse.
A lot worse.
Yes.
Rich.
Yeah, and actually, I know this is out of order, but Robbie Burke, who's had his hand up, is a friend. He had reached out about the issue of enforcement, and I had reached out to Andrew and Howard suggesting putting it on the agenda, and it's part of agenda item number 2 of enforcement issues, not including but not limited to Central Park West and 65th. I'd love for him to raise his concern, and then I have thoughts about it. But if he could go next, that would be great.
Okay.
Robbie, you're on.
Is he unmuted?
Let me see.
I might even promote him.
He can talk now.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
It's been a fascinating meeting. I live at 84th and Broadway. I would like to just, before I get to my issue, highlight what Irena said. Maybe we could work with these, and I hate the bikes, they make noise, they're dangerous, but maybe we could work with them to find a time where they could ride, where you would close off the streets, to find out who they are, to work with them, because they could be doing a lot worse. Okay, but that's a separate issue. So my issue that I'd like to bring up for your help is that noise of vehicles, particularly these refrigerated delivery trucks that have these extremely noisy refrigeration units above the cab of the truck. I'm on the second floor working 60 hours, in my apartment doing, medical research. And, it's this low drum, which is real. They're double parked illegally. And, it's been really difficult to concentrate. In addition, there is a ice cream truck that parks in a no standing zone, blocks the walkway at 84th by the movie theater there. And again, it's refrigeration unit. It's spewing out high levels of exhaust. It's extremely noisy. And, I've called, 311 and, it's been difficult. I've gone and tried to talk with the people, but we shouldn't really allow this in our community. It decreases the level of, the quality of living. It affects my work because, it's very loud. So
is there a name on the truck?
Yes. It is the, hold on one second. I've tried to contact it's a Mr. Softy truck.
Ah.
But it's not just one. It's because I've taken pictures. There are multiple ones. It's really one that's has this broken refrigeration unit that when they put the motor on, it's this very loud drone, which is extremely annoying, just as the loud drone of these delivery truck refrigeration units above the cab. So thank you for your commitment to the community. I've been on since 6:30. It's been amazing to hear all the issues that I live with, as I'm in the community. But so I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will, I'll actually take a walk around and see that truck and see what the issue is.
It's usually around 5:30 to 7.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, I think Robbie and a lot of these discussions have brought up a few interesting issues about enforcement. I think one issue that we face is that I'm not seeing as much coordination as I'd like to see between when DOT passes new laws and what's enforced. And I think there are some major issues. I think there are some really minor ones. One really minor one is on Riverside Drive, just north of 104th Street, right near me. There are 2 spots that are always occupied by cars with placards. Again, real minor issue, but a good example. I wrote to Colleen saying, since these spots are always taken, why don't we increase the parking in our neighborhood and just make these 2 legal spots? And Colleen wrote back to me saying, no, DOT decided that for safety reasons, we want this to be daylighted. But those spots are always taken with placards illegally staying in these spots when they shouldn't be. Another one is on my block, a car is always parked on the sidewalk. And my sister who lives in the 60s emailed a picture of a motorcycle that's always parked on the sidewalk. It's just not enforced. On Robbie's, one thing Robbie didn't mention is these refrigerated trucks are also double parked, which blocks a lane of traffic. That's causing issues. Another example is Columbus Circle, DOT put in a bike lane. The police department transportation unit needed more parking. They're just always parked in the bike lane. So I feel like the coordination between the laws that are and the signage implemented by DOT and what the police department wants to enforce or is able to enforce is not coordinated. I also feel like there's just a general lawlessness. I know some people on the committee feel that it applies to bikes, some feel it applies to these ATVs, some feel it applies to cars. And it's easy for us just as a knee-jerk say, yeah, we need to enforce that, we need to enforce that, we need to enforce that, and say, it's not one or the other. But we also need to understand the realities of the police force, and they've got very, very limited capacity. And I think the more that we shout, you need to enforce everything, isn't prioritizing. It's not us giving a point of view of what the most important issues are. And it's not really saying anything. And I think we need to figure out, what are the biggest priorities for enforcement and be really strategic about, what is it that the board wants to achieve, and how do we work with the police, to understand their limitations. And, we've talked both with ATVs and with bikes about we don't want them engaged in high-speed chases, but what are the capabilities of what they can enforce and what they can't enforce? And are we calling on them to enforce really dangerous biking, but then they're going after people riding 5 miles per hour as a way of saying, hey, we got a lot of bike tickets. But we need to understand, what's possible and use that as a way of saying, well, as much as we'd like to say the police department needs to enforce this, maybe it's a design issue that would be needed to change the behavior because enforcement's not possible or it's not going to have the effect we want. Maybe it's an issue with delivery cyclists of, you can enforce all you want, but if they're not going to make any money unless they break the law, their need to make money is going to override their stopping at red lights. So I think there's a lot behind the scenes that we need to understand to be able to understand, what design changes are needed and what enforcement is possible.
You raise a lot of good points, Rich.
Yeah, really, the most important point being that there are finite resources. There's no way the NYPD can go after every conceivable violation. Technically, jaywalking is illegal. So, they have to use their very limited resources in the way that creates the most safety on the street. So it's a very complicated and important issue.
But we've actually had an effect on some of those issues that Rich raised on refrigerated trucks. We've had Fresh Direct move what was a very noisy problem at 87th, 88th in Amsterdam. And on the issue of Columbus Circle, bike lane being blocked by the police, I've spoken with the head of Transit District 1, and they've removed as much as they can, but sometimes there's a circumstance where they have to bring it in. But they've actually spoken to each of their officers who drive to work and told them about this. So some of these issues we have addressed. If they're repeat issues, we will keep addressing it.
Anything
Absolutely.
I had an item of new business.
Okay, Ken?
Which this is what Andrew said is a really good segue because it involves Captain Zuber isn't here, is he?
We were hoping he would join, but apparently he couldn't.
Okay, because this involves 20th precinct vehicles. Community
yes.
member called to my attention that 20th precinct personal vehicles are being parked in the left turn lane at Columbus Avenue, right at 81st Street. So if you're going south on Columbus Avenue, trying to make a left onto 81st and go across the park, you there are usually two cars parked in the left turn lane. So you actually have to go into the straight ahead lane, travel lane, which of course
this is north of 81st, right?
Just north of 81st, right?
What a place to park.
Well,
Jeez.
yeah, I mean, I've heard of kind of outrageous examples of police illegally parking, but this kind
Plus
of
it blocks visibility for other motorists.
Yeah, and of course backs up traffic because people turning left are in a travel lane going straight.
And we have left turn arrows there for a particular reason, and they are coordinated with the bike lane there so that you're not crossing on each other.
Right, right. So what can we do? Should we make a call to Captain Zuber, send a letter? What?
Steve can write to him. Steve is in touch with him.
I think actually a call would be probably more effective given the sensitivity of the situation. So Steve, if you have a relationship with him, would you mind calling?
Listen, we can figure out how to communicate it. I wouldn't use the word relationship with Captain Zuber. I think to the extent of my relationship, you guys see publicly, but I'm more than willing to talk to you and Andrew afterwards in the proper way.
And Ken, how often are these vehicles there?
We got to be somewhat sensitive to the issue. I understand the challenge, and we'll come up with a way that we believe would be the proper, sensitive, and sensible way to convey this issue.
Ken, how often are these vehicles there?
I couldn't tell you. I personally haven't seen it, but this other person called it to my attention, sent me pictures. I assume he's seen it more than once.
Very, very not safe. Okay, thank you.
Ken, can you share the pictures with Howard and myself? I mean, Andrew and Howard, I think that would be.
Yeah, that would be great. And if you had time of days, I would do it privately. I wouldn't raise it at full board when Captain Zuber comes. This is something we do privately with him.
Yeah, we'll figure something out.
Yes.
But share the pictures. It would be prudent.
Anybody with any other issues? Well, we've had a heck of a meeting. Lots of great issues raised.
Yeah.
And a couple of letters will be written. Mark, there you go.
Sorry, I just thought of something. If there is going to be a sort of below the radar contact with Captain Zuber, could I throw another issue in there, which is that the folks who live on 82nd Street, sort of opposite or next to or nearby the precinct house, obviously the officers park there all over the place, and the residents don't get their streets swept because of the changing shift times and so forth. So a few years ago, there was a very informal below the radar conversation with then Captain, later Deputy Inspector Mallon, in which he said, yeah, we'll fix that. And so I don't know if you want to pollute this this approach with that, but I would recommend, I completely endorse the idea of a sort of a below the radar approach. And this might be another issue that would lend itself to that if there is room for it.
If you want to send some details, and whatever relationship I've had will be deteriorating very quickly, but I'd be happy to work an hour.
I'm pretty sure that you would appreciate the fact that you're approaching it with such sensitivity.
We'll figure out a way to do it. And
just say somebody brought it to your attention. That's all.
I just want to say, Howard and Andrew and Doug, when you work on that letter about the ATVs, I'd love to join in.
By all means.
Absolutely.
Why not?
I hope you run it by the committee too.
Yeah.
That's,
Of course.
good.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Have a good
everybody.
night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.